So thanks for joining me this afternoon. I thought I'd do the live today using the Petite Petals. It's one of Lisa's perhaps older releases, but it's just perfect for this time of year because there's so much blossom around at the moment that I'm seeing. And at the bottom of the school where I take my son, to school actually, there's a little crossroads place, and just on the little island there is the hugest blossom tree that you've ever seen. It's absolutely full of pink and white blossom, and it's just so wide. I've never seen a tree full of blossom that size. If I get a chance to put it on my Facebook group, on my Facebook later on, and you get to see it, you'll see what made me think about doing this card today. So I thought the Petite Petals would be an ideal set to use today. And I thought I'd just go simple in a way because I'm not using any stencils as such, but I did want to use some inks, and I created this little inky background here. You've possibly seen quite a few of the design team cards coming through with little scenes like this in the background. I know Maria's just done a fabulous one with, I think it was a hummingbird in the front. Yeah, it was the hummingbird. And I know it's a favourite of Mary's to do. And I used to do this sort of thing a lot. But you know how things move on and you try different things. I've not done this for a little while. So if you were wondering how those little scenes were made, then I can show you through that today. Hi, Alex. Hi, Tammy. Oh, hi, you're from Texas. Wow. Oh, it's 8 o'clock in the morning. Oh, that's a nice sociable time, isn't it, to join us? So you're having your breakfast and with a cup of coffee, perhaps. Hopefully it'll be a nice, gentle way to wake you up to your day there. Okay, so yes, I create this card. I added a little bit of detail on here. I wanted to, I haven't attached that in the back, have I? I just wanted to add a little bit of detail here. Just kept it all in white, just kept it simple. So it's there to add a little bit of interest. And also just to remind you, because this is another of the old designs, it's one of the very original designs that Lisa has just released, and now that she's just released it, it's come through in its lovely fancy new packaging, which is like this. But this is the old packaging, so this is the very original packaging from when Lisa started out about 3 years ago. So sort of ignore the way it's packed here. I've got my set sat on some magnetic strip here, but you will get yours in a lovely envelope to keep it all like this. So you can see the detailing I've got on the side of the card. I've actually shaped the card front again, a bit similar to how I did last week. And I've added the bubble die cut there. So I'll show you just how I created that as well. So let's get going. The actual prep for the card blank probably takes the most amount of time for this card, to be honest. So let's put that there. And I'll just put that there just to remind you of the set that I'm using. Let's put that there. Okie doke. So I'm using, it's just shy of a 6x6 card blank here, just a standard square card blank. I'll just get my ruler out for you. Yeah, you see it's just shy of a 6x6 inch cardstock. Card blank, sorry. I've shaped the front of the cardstock. Now this is not quite as complicated as it was as last week, purely because of the nature of the dies that I've used. And I'll bring in the In the Loop collection again. This set is made up of 4 dies, which is a really useful set actually. And because this is sitting in the background, I just want to have just the shaped cloud effect on the side of the card. So that would be this really thin die here, which it packs a big punch. It's a tiny little die, but it creates a lovely shape like this. And all I've done is just positioned that on the side of the card. I've positioned it that way. You can do it this way. You can sit it however you like. You can see the way that this card is shaped it's very different to this one. So depending on how you angle that, the shape of your card would be very different. So all you do is just attach this to the edge of your card, put a little bit of low-tack tape on there and just run that through your die cutting machine. And you can see that the nature of the die means that you won't be cutting anything extra other than just the edge of the card. So that is created there. Now the beauty of this design actually is that it will work on any shaped card. I've used a square, but a rectangle card, even a circular card, sort of the premise of how the card is designed, you can add onto your favourite shaped card basically. So the next thing I've done, I've cut myself another 6x6 piece of card. This will go on the top, and I've die cut this piece in exactly the same way as I've done the front of the cardstock. So that will basically act as a mat, and it's in exactly the same shape and size. And you'll see the reason for that in a second. So we have our 2 layers like that. Then a third piece of cardstock, which started out 6x6, the same as the card front again. And this time, instead of using the edge die, I've actually used the detail die and die cut the bubbles into the edge of the cardstock, like so. Excuse the aperture in a second. I'll explain that in a minute. So I'll just put this on here. So this time around, I've actually die cut the bubbles, and I've made sure that I've die cut the bubbles in the same orientation as the other 2 pieces, as the other piece of single cardstock and the same as the card front, so they all line up together. So hopefully you can see that that makes sense. And with this particular one, what I've done, I've made sure that I've kept all the bubbles in situ. So if I turn that over, what you can see is when I've actually taken this out of the die cutting machine, and while it's still sitting on the die cutting plate, I've kept the die in place. I brought it back to my desk, I've flipped it over, and as gently as I could, I've made sure that I've lifted that out, trying to keep all the bubbles and the circles in position. Don't worry too much if they do come out. And then I've just taped them all in place. I've used some washi tape here. You can paper piece them back in. That is absolutely fine. If they all come out and all else fails and your die cutting machine has been super efficient, and I know that the dies cut really, really well, so there's every chance that all the bubbles are going to fall out anyway, but that's absolutely fine. This is what this second piece is for. What you can do, you lay these 2 pieces together, and you can see why now that this bottom piece hasn't got the bubbles cut into them. Lay them on together. Use some glue. You can either paper piece the bubbles back in and attach them on the reverse with washi tape, which is my preference, because sometimes if I'm a bit heavy-handed with the glue, it can make, when these don't always sit as nicely back in. But you just lay these together. These should match exactly in shape and size. Yeah, you match them together. And then your adhesive of choice, basically, you just paper piece all the bubbles back in. This is a slightly different to look to what I've done here. I just wanted to show you both ways, and I think both ways work equally as well, to be honest. I've left the bubbles out of this one just to add a little bit of dimensions or perhaps a bit more texture, but I wanted to just see the effect of leaving the bubbles in this time, because when I'd actually do the inking, I'm actually sort of spreading the ink out beyond this aperture here. You can see that just slightly there, and having the bubbles in is going to give me a different effect. So that will basically be how the card is built. You can see how that's all coming together. So I'm going to put this card blank to one side. Now the next thing you'll notice is that I've got an aperture cut here, and this is basically to house the little scene that we're going to be creating with the ink. So I've used one of the newer nesting sets, which is the the rectangles, the A2, so it's a slightly smaller set, and it's a really useful set to have. And I've chosen these two dies, and it will be the third smallest, and I've used this die to cut the aperture out of there. And then, so I'm using textured cardstock here, and instead of using the aperture that I cut out, which is textured, which you're more than welcome to use, I just wanted to change the texture of the card, so I've recut myself another piece of cardstock, but the super smooth card from the same die, so this will slot back in here. So I've actually got two different textures, so I think that just, because I'm using a lot of white card here, that just gives me a little bit texture, a little bit of difference on the front of the card. But if you wanted to use the textured cardstock to ink onto, then that would work perfectly well as well. So these are the elements that we need for the card. Now you'll see why in a second I've actually die cut this section, because, well, there's two ways of doing it. If you didn't want the ink when we're creating the scene to spread beyond the central focal point, then there's not really any need for you to cut the aperture. But because I want to spread the ink beyond, and I want it to correspond to what's going on here, by cutting the aperture and then sitting this one back in, it gives me that little frame so they actually stay connected. And you'll see why in a second. If you wanted to just ink on the aperture, you don't need to die cut, and you can just sit this on top, and you can either glue it straight onto the top, or you can use some 3D foam to give that some dimension. So I'm just thinking at this stage, what I can do now, if you're going to sort of follow this sort of to the letter, at this stage now, it will be a good idea to actually attach these two layers together. And also it means that the extra bubbles there are secured in their apertures. So we'll just put those together. And it also makes this frame a lot more solid. It gives it a lot more structure, doesn't it? So make sure that I line that up perfectly. There we are. That is ready to go. So as I say, we'll be inking directly onto this central part, and I do actually want to extend the colour beyond. I quite like that effect when you can, especially when you sort of 3D this, you can see the image sort of going on into the background. It's, if you want a more of a clean and simple card, or a cleaner card, then just keep it in the centre there. Right, now the advantage also of using the in the loop die set is that it will give you the shape to create some clouds and the scenery in the background. Now bear with me, I thought I got myself out another piece of cardstock as a mask, but I didn't. Okay, so you can see here, because I'm using the cherry blossom, I want to create sky and fields in the background basically. So we have the light blue ink, which I'm using the Surfs Up, which, contrary to actually the colour on the front here, gives a really lovely sky blue, which is more reminiscent of the blue skies that we have here. They're very rarely this colour, are they? And then also I'm using a combination of woodland moss and some of the magic shimmer, which is the interference ink, just to create some of the colour in the background, in the foreground. Now there are a couple of ways of creating your mask for this. The way that I tend to do it is get myself just a piece of copy paper, and I just rip the paper in an undulating fashion to create what would be ideal for clouds and ideal for fields. You can see the ones that I've used here. But if you are not confident in doing that, or for some reason you just can't create the perfect rip that looks good to you, this is where these dies come into play. Now, you can see here where I've actually die cut the edge of the card with this. That is so reminiscent of clouds that would be an ideal way for you to cut yourself a piece of cardstock. Just cut it again, just randomly, on any piece of cardstock or copy paper, and then you've created yourself your equivalent of your sky mask there for clouds. Equally, if you weren't able to create the perfect sort of rip for your fields, which we've all been there, you think, oh no, that's not quite right, I'll try it again, and before you know it, you've gone through 5-10 sheets of card and you're still not happy. This is where these other two dies, either one, doesn't really matter, these would actually work also, because they give you that nice gentle sort of pasture look. So you can die cut yourself again another piece of cardstock, and that will be your mask also. Now, Lisa did have another die set, and I can't remember the name of it just now, and it is out of stock, and it's possible that a few of you here do have that set. I think it was basically made up of these single strips which you can shape the side of your card with, but also ideal for creating the masks as well. So if you have those in your stash, and perhaps you don't have the bubbles, then that would be a really good set for you to use also. But I'm going to continue on and use my paper here, because this is what I've already created. Now we can actually get onto some inking. Let's actually start making something. So, the other thing I perhaps want to do is just make sure that we have that little known object in the sky, perhaps a sun. You could always do this, and this could be the moon. Now, I've used masking paper for this, and Lisa does actually have this on her website at the moment. It comes like this. You get no, you don't. You get 10 sheets of 6x6 inch masking paper. And this is fully die cuttable. So all you need to do is just to make yourself like a sun or a moon mask. Find yourself one of your circle dies from any of the sets that you have that fits the size that you want. It die cuts perfectly, and you have 2 layers. Now I would suggest when you take this off, keep the carry layer, because this mask is reusable and that will re-cling onto there. It's not sticky as such, but it's more of a cling type material, if you know what I mean. So I shall use this larger one this time. I used a smaller one before, and I'm going to set the sun just a bit lower this time, because I think I'm going to do more sky and less green this time round. So I'm going to set the sun just there. Now this is fabulous stuff, because when you take this off, it doesn't rip the paper. Now I shall bring in my sun mask, my sky mask. Again, you can use whichever suits. There is a die set also that Lisa had with trees and a picket fence. The die cuts that you have for the trees, the tops of the trees, are cloud shape. So they would also be a fabulous mask if you wanted to use those with Lisa's masking paper and ink over those as well. So that's just another suggestion. But let's get going. Now I'm going to use the bijou brushes for this, because they lay down such a gentle amount of colour, which I find is just perfect for this technique. Especially when you have an ink colour that looks a bit scary and you want it to go down really pale. It's a perfect blue colour and say surfs up, so it makes you think of sea, but it is ideal for clouds and the sky. So let's actually get on and do something, shall we? So we can pick up some ink. Now I'm going to buff some of this off on my non-stick mat here. And I am just going to gently lay down some colour. Now you can see here the advantage of having this aperture set within this frame. It means it's not going anywhere, and it just gives you a bit of more of an opportunity to hold this down. Now if you wanted to, you could actually place this in your Ultimate and use the magnets. That will just give you some added security and make sure that that's not going anywhere. So now the key to this is gentle layering up of ink, and you will see in a second just how effective this is when I pull the mask away. Now it's gentle circular motions again, and normally I would say don't go over the edge, but I do actually want the colour to extend onto the outside frame here to be less prominent than what would be in the centre, but still sort of overlap nonetheless. And just through force of habit, I always buffer onto the paper first, and that gives me a really nice smooth line. Now you can, let me just catch up. Oh yeah, you can see how that ink is laying down. Now I want to move my mask, and I'm just going to move it randomly. I don't want to follow the same line of the clouds all the way down because that would look too uniform. But I'm just going to carry on adding ink and just moving that mask down as I go, and that just creates the illusion of cloud, and it just gives a really gentle amount of colour. And it doesn't matter if when you overlap onto the ink that you've already laid down, because that just gives you them different layers and the colours that we see in the sky anyway. And can you see that building? Let me just wait for my screen to catch up. Yes, you can see that building. Now you can also start seeing that we're going to come down and start meeting with our sun just down here as well, but you don't need to do anything different. You just carry on blending over the top of that. Now, as I say, I'm actually going to do more sky on this one than I did on the last, just to have something a little bit different. We don't like to make cards that are all identical, do we? And again, this is just one of those techniques that I just sort of do switch off on. So I apologise if I go a bit quiet. I'll try to remember not to. Again, I want to try also just to make sure that I have a little bit of colour just coming onto the edge of that, onto the edge of the frame there as well. So we just carry on down, we just build up, we're just basically building that colour in small sections as we go. And you can still see that, my my piece of card is locked in its frame actually, so that's acting really well as a nice frame and a nice holder there to keep that all secure. So keep adding your ink down, just, and it's slowly building a really nice background. You can add different effects by adding different types of blue in there, perhaps a little bit of grey. Although we've had enough grey in our skies just lately, haven't we? Honestly, we really do need a good run of spring, I think, don't we? So that's looking really nice to me. I'm really happy with the way that that's been layered. So let me just get rid of that blue ink there. And you can see also how efficient and how suited the little Bijou brushes are to blend in that way too. So we've used our blue ink. Now I'm going to come on to our green. Now Lisa does have quite a few greens in the collection now, so I really do like this woodland moss because again it can give you a really nice blend of colour, and it's a really soft green, this one. And I'm going to use a blending brush for it this time, purely because that's what I have to hand. Now I'm going to turn this around, and because I want to work and create the fields upwards, I want to obviously create more green down at the bottom. So when I put the mask on, I want to be adding the mask on that way, if that makes sense, because I want obviously the hills to be created sort of reaching the sky. And that may sound an obvious thing, but sometimes certainly when I first started doing this type of technique, I would do it. I wouldn't always think about that. And then I couldn't quite work out why it didn't look quite right. So I'll take my blending ink, always blend off the majority of it first, work onto your mask and then onto your project. Because you'll see here that it's a little bit heavy. I'll try to disguise it the best I could, but I got a little bit too eager and I didn't blot off my ink quite enough. So I ended up with the ink a bit too heavy there, which you can blend out, you can disguise if I'd gone heavier with the ink around it, but that's not the look that I wanted for that. And I think sometimes when you try and fix something, you can end up going too far and you're not always happy with the outcome. So I'm going to make sure that I add on a fair bit of ink here, because I want because this is right in the foreground, obviously this would be the closest to you and therefore would have the most amount of colour. So I'm going to make sure that I have some of that ink so we have a green hue coming out onto that frame as well. I really want to have that scene sort of extended. There's a little bit of glue there, a little bit of adhesive, just move that away. There. So let's try and get that a little bit darker. Now, if you wanted to add some dimension, what you can do is bring in your smaller stencil brush and just stroke that down from the mask onto your piece of artwork there, and that will actually give you a more defined line. Now you can see here that the grass and the green is a lot more in your face than the sky would be. And I think this time around, that's why I wanted to use slightly less green than before. So we carry on. As you see, I've just moved my paper around. So we start building a landscape, basically, like the rolling hills of the countryside. So we want to make sure that we have a good amount of ink on there. It's never going to be as dark as the ink that you've put in the foreground, so that's where your layering and your dimension comes in, because you will have different layers of colours of the one colour. And I think that's what's so effective when you use this technique. And again, we still have that coming out, extending onto the frame. I want to make a point of that for sure on this one. So I'm using my stencil brush just to make sure I get that definition coming out onto the side there. Now it could be that I'll swap back to add some more blue in a second. We'll see how it goes. So I'll add another layer of fields like that. Now the beauty of also doing this is that every single one that you create will be different, particularly if you rip your paper in this way. You'll always add a different intensity of ink. The placement of the masks will be slightly different each time, so you know that you will create a different piece of artwork each time. And it is a little piece of artwork. I know we are crafting, but this is your little piece of artwork, something that you can be proud of. And I think this one really does make you feel like an artist as opposed to a crafter once you've when you create something like this. And if you think back to some of the other sets also that Lisa has with the gnomes, and she's got various sort of wildflower stamps that you may have, these would be ideal to stamp in the foreground as well. So we have our fields there. I think that's looking quite nice. And I think what I might do just to finish off, I will just come down and just add some more blue. And we'll make sure, I think, that we'll add, there we are. It doesn't matter if the colours do overlap a little bit. I think that is perfectly acceptable and works really quite well. So we'll just add some more blue. And make sure that we have that defined line going on there. Okay, I think that works really well, actually. Now what we can do, we can actually peel off this section now. And if you just do this gently and peel it so it stays as close to the cardstock as possible. So what you can see, I'm actually peeling that right off instead of pulling it off at 90 degrees, which then would increase the risk of it tearing the paper. If you actually peel it back like that, you've got much less chance of damaging the cardstock in the centre there. Now that is reusable. You'll know when it's not reusable because it will be so full of ink and then it won't sit back onto its carrier sheet. So you'll get a feel of when it's ready to be replaced. Now what we can do, I'm going to use another of these bijou brushes because I've got one that's for the yellow ink. We don't want to leave that white, do we, really? Let's just move that along a little bit. I'm going to bring in Lisa's yellow ink, which is Juicy Pineapple. I'm just going to pick up a tiny bit of ink, again, buffer off the majority of it. And all I'm just going to do, just gently round around in the centre of the sun there. And that will just give me a really gentle sort of lemon look to that. Hopefully you can see, oh yes you can. You can see there on the screen that that has given that sun just a little bit of a hue, and it's actually extended beyond the lines, which is how the sun sort of radiates into the sky. So I think that works really, really well as well. So when we take this away, we don't need that now, you can actually see what we have left on our frame. And that is what I wanted. I wanted that to be extend beyond this aperture. Now, this means that when we 3D this, or we can even lay it flat, it just gives us lots of dimension. On this card here, I've laid it all flat and I've actually added a frame. Now, there's two ways we can add a frame. We can add a frame in itself, and we can just add that to the aperture. And the way that frame was created was again with the nesting squares, the nesting rectangles. We use the rectangle that we used to cut the aperture, and we use the next size up. And die cutting those two together will give us that frame. Obviously, if you want a thicker frame, then you can do. You can choose the largest of the frames and the one that we used to cut the aperture with, and that will give you a thicker frame. You can, if you want to 3D this, so there's different combinations. You can either cut your frame and then you can 3D this above the frame. Also, that's another way of doing that. Or you can create yourself an entire mat. You can mat your piece of artwork and then you can 3D this whole piece above. So you've got many different options there on how to finish this card, depending on also on how you embellish around the outside. But I think what I might do, I will just leave it like this, and I will put my frame around the outside because I want to add my cherry blossom on afterwards, which was the whole theme of the live today. So I'm just going to add my frame just quickly. So we add that like that. And what this does, it creates that separation between the artwork and the frame. And because you actually created the outside of the frame at the same time as the artwork, you've still got that connection between the two. So there is sort of continuity with how that sort of leaked on out, even though we've had that frame to break up the picture. That's a look that I really like. That's and it's really effective and really easy to do. So what we can do, actually, I won't 3D this one. I will add that to the centre, like so. Okay, so what we can do now is go on to actually add our petals and our blossom. And I've already, oh, I didn't die cut the second piece, did I? So to die cut the actual branch and the twig itself, I've coloured myself a piece of card. Now you can use brown cardstock, you can use whatever you have in your stash, but I actually wanted to test out the colours of the inks that Lisa's brought out. We do have a warm chestnut shimmer, which is the interference ink, and we do have the tree bark blending ink as well now. And I did actually just want to test out the colours, to be honest, which is the reason why I've coloured the cardstock myself. And this is a combination of the two. So when you actually tilt this, there is a very slight hint of the interference colour, not too much, but all I've used is a blending sponge because the interference inks blend better with a blending sponge. And we can just blend this onto our cardstock. Oh, be a little bit more gentle, and we can blend that along with the tree bark, and that just gives a really nice deep brown colour. I really like that effect. So what I'm realising I didn't do was die cut that, so if you want to bear with me, because it's kind of essential to build the cherry blossom, but I will show you the dies actually. She says, where's the tree trunk die? So the dies that come in the Petite Petal set are the petals itself, which come connected, so they come as a solid plate. So that means that we can cut multiple all in one go. And then you have your branches. Now we have the opportunity to cut stems, so we can make a posy, or we can cut a branch like so. So if you can just bear with me 2 ticks, I will die cut myself one of these branches. Okay, and because I've kept all the dies together, I've actually die cut some stems as well, so at least I've got those ready and stored in my envelope for later. Now if you wanted, you could actually create a posy of flowers with these instead of using the branch. Now I've got some of the stems that I cut from earlier on too. That could actually look quite lovely if we would do it like this, couldn't it? You'd cut them down to size, obviously. And let me just bring in the petals, which I've already created and made up for you. A mixture of textured white cardstock and vellum. The vellum I coloured myself as well, and I shall show you that in a second. Let me just get my branch from there. So, and some tweezers. Okay, so if you wanted to actually create a posy of flowers, this could actually work really nicely as well, couldn't it? How pretty is that? That's a really nice look. Very different from what we've got there. That works just as well. So that is another option. So what I like with Lisa's dies, there's always an alternative. You start out making something with an idea, and by the time you've finished, you've either got another couple of ideas or you completely deviated because you've gone on a completely different tangent with the dies that you've used. But I've got the branch that we've cut here, so we can add that to our card. Now again, we can start adding our blossom. And all we need to do is just add a double glue behind the flowers there and just start layering those up. And the beauty of these is that you can see from here that the petals come in all different shapes and sizes, and all I've done was just cut them a couple of times out of a couple of different colours, and without thinking about it too much, just randomly, I just layered up the petals. So we have lots of different blooms, lots of different shapes and sizes, which I think really it is reminiscent of what you see out in nature. Now I've covered up that twig quite a lot actually, isn't it? So I might actually leave it like that. And that would be ready then, if I were to glue all of those down, to add to the front of my cardstock, or the card blank, sorry. Because the shaped element on both of the layers match up with the card blank that we've created. Now let me just show you quickly how I created the pink element of those flowers. I took myself a piece of vellum and I've used the Cherry Bomb Shimmer ink and used a blending sponge. Again, let me just reach over, excuse me. And I've just colour tinted the vellum. Now this goes on really, really nicely. You've actually got quite a lot of open time because of the nature of the vellum to actually really blend out that ink. Let me put that onto a piece of white paper so you can actually see that blend. This blends out so well on vellum. You've actually got a lot of time to move that around, and it dries pretty quick as well. Obviously the more ink that you put on and you layer up, it's going to take a lot longer to dry, but just either let it air dry, or you can blot it off, or just gently put your heat tool on it just to give that a little bit of drying time. You don't need much, because by the time you've done that, it's dried and very workable to die cut with. So that is how I die cut all of the petals. You can see there the way that that's worked through, and you'll have that slight interference shimmer on there as well, and that would look beautiful in any of the interference colours as well. I think it just gives a really soft look to the colour. And then all that's needed really is to finish off with a sentiment of your choice. I've decided to stamp from one of these sets here, and I shall stamp another one on here. I shall do that in a second when I put the rest of the card together and photograph it for the group for you, and I put it on YouTube. But hopefully that's given you a little insight on how some of these just more inky techniqued cards are made. You really don't need to use a whole lot of product really, and if you want to just have a good play with the inks and just see how they work, then this sort of technique is really ideal for that. So I'll leave that with you there for today. Thanks so much for joining me this afternoon. Take care everyone, see you soon, bye.